Welcome to the shop. Today I'm going to show you how I sewed these bar mittens for my bicycles. They also are sometimes called Pogies. I started off with a paper template and I ended up having to add some width to it to my original line work when I compared this length to a sleeve length, and I was comparing it to existing coats and jackets that I had and decided that I needed to go a little bit bigger. And then I transferred that over to this this piece of corrugated plastic. It's from a recycled sign, and so that gives me a solid pattern to draw from. I got that tip from, I think it was Doug D on YouTube, who was also making these bar mitts. I've used Coroplast for a lot of things, so I'm always happy to find another use for it. And then I cut out and quickly sewed a rough prototype for it. I'm just trying to, I don't have anybody's bar mitts to take measurements from right now, so I'm just kind of figuring out as I go. Yeah, and so I feel like that'll work. This I probably made a little bit too long. Well, I did make it too long on purpose, so I can tuck it in there, and then that'll draw it the whole sleeve this way, and I can figure out my dimensions. And yeah, it's looking like that'll be enough. There'll be some insulation in the final version, so I'll take up some space, but I have plenty of room for my gloves. And yeah, so I'll refine this pattern just a little bit more before moving on to the real deal. I used these clips to hold my position after I had this mocked up on the bike, and so now I have a new pattern to follow for making the Pogies. Now that I got my pattern made, I'm gonna go ahead and cut it out using a rotary cutter. I'm using these machining blocks and 1, 2, 3 blocks and some angle blocks to just hold it in place. You could use whatever weight you have. I used to use books, but I recently picked up a bunch of these 1, 2, 3 blocks, and they're super handy to have. And I'm cutting, I could cut this 2 layers at a time to get the 2 halves that I need, but I want to pull from the right part of this fabric, so I'm doing them one at a time so I don't miss anything. I got this old sleeping bag that had a bunch of tears in it, and it's a pretty cheap one to begin with, but it has some of this insulation I need, and you can quickly harvest a lot of materials from old soft goods you have that wear out. So I got my insulation clipped to the inner liner, and I'm just gonna do a couple quick stitches to hold it in place so it doesn't float around once it's in the mitten. And I got my settings on the widest zigzag and the longest stitch for now, just because I want to cover a lot of ground on this material. To complete the floating liner, I'm gonna sew the rest of the edges where that won't be openings for hands or the handlebars. I got my 2 halves stitched together, and they're facing wrong side out, and that way I can sew along the edge and flip it inside out when I'm ready, and it'll hide my seams. This is probably going to be a little bit hard to start because it's so soft and silky, so I'm going to try to use this to push it along a little bit. And I'm also using a Microtex needle here because this 15D taffeta is so silky, and I've turned my stitch length down to 1 with a 0 zigzag, and all that is just to help with the tight weave of the fabric compared to the soft insulation and fleece that we were working with earlier. I have my outer shell inside my liner, and both of the A surfaces are facing each other, and so this is going to make a floating liner as I sew it along the openings. We got our outer shell sewn to our liner along this opening, so we're going to pull it out, and then we'll pull this through. Push out our seams because they're inside out, and we have our nice finished edge there. So the liner is going to be a floating liner since it's only attached here and here. I got to clean this edge up yet, but the rest of it on the inside is going to be able to move around. On my first attempt, I had the liner sewn in all the way around, and that presented some problems with it getting really thick when I was trying to sew through it, because I was sewing through lots of layers, and then aligning everything was hard. And so this method of construction is a lot better than creating two halves with everything sewn together and then sewing along the edge and flipping inside out. That way it proved to be quite troublesome, but the floating liner is working out pretty well so far. I rolled the edge of my liner and then tucked it in place with those clips, and so now I can pull my shell over, and then I'll fold it and tuck it and pin it, clip it. So our edges are a little different, our seams. I could have done a little bit of a cleaner job, but it'll be alright, it'll still keep me warm. This flipped edge looks a lot better though. I got my mitten flipped inside out again, so I can sew this bit of Velcro in, and this is going to allow me to close the opening around the handlebars to keep the warm air in and the cold air out. Now to rotate on a corner like this, I'm going to make sure my needle's all the way down, lift the foot up and rotate. Now's a good time to make sure you're not sewing through your other side too. Foot down. Repeat. So I'm just hand stitching in this last little extra bit of fabric. My sewing machine couldn't go through all these layers, unfortunately, but what this fabric will allow me to do is fill in this gap when this is closed around the handlebars, and so that'll allow me to keep a lot more of the warm air in and the cold air out. Cool. Got our Velcro. They're going perpendicular to each other so they can kind of adjust depending on where the bike and the handlebar controls are. This might live on different bikes, so I made it to fit mine, but it might go on another new bike one day. And so I'm going to stuff my extra fabric around these controls. And that'll block the airflow, and then come in and tighten my Velcro, and cool, we got our Pogies installed. I might put a pin here on the end of the handlebars to hold this in place, but we'll see how they ride. Overall, I'm very pleased with how these turned out. They keep my hands a lot warmer and extend my cycling season. Here we have a quick overview of the iterations I went through to get to my final design. First, I start off with a rough paper template, which I used to make a corrugated plastic pattern next. From then I verified my fit using the orange rough prototype before moving on to my V1 iteration and my V2 final design. I hope that this helped someone and that you learned something. If it did, please like, comment, or subscribe. Thanks for watching. Take care.